my Power Center short story by me, Brandur Karlsson. Part 1. Mario woke up with his head pounding. Flashes of memories from the night before rolled through like a fog. What did I do to myself? He thought, and instantly regretted it. She was gone. He had tried everything to forget, taken every drug to be found in the dorm, but it had not worked. She was etched into his soul, so that his only escape was drug-induced unconsciousness. Sleep by itself only brought dreams of her simple presence a nightmare. He glanced around the room. Empty food containers were strewn between the books and the clothes in need of cleaning. A pocket knife caught his attention. A thought snuck in. He could end it. Open his wrists, let his pain flow out and escape. Fuck no, he thought, not ready to die. His grief turned from depression and sadness to anger and astonishment. How could it all have come to this? How could this have happened to him? He got up too fast and had to sit down again. The sudden movement stirring up all the chemicals still in his body. His poor organs struggled to clean them out and return to a more sober equilibrium. A few moments later, he had showered, eaten some questionable leftovers, and was searching for the least odorous clothes he could find. A determination had taken root in him, born of the need to move forward, to rise out of the humiliation he found himself in. The only way out is through. He walked out of a cleaned room some hours later, with 2 boxes full of garbage. Clothes that were too far gone he threw away, the rest he washed. The next few days he spent catching up on his studies, as if he could cover up the ever-flaring memories with mountains of new knowledge. Mathematics, sociology, history, game theory, network analysis, political theory. He drank it all in with an unquenchable thirst. His professors began to notice him. His questions during class were insightful and revealed the clever mind that had hibernated through the doomed love and subsequent self-destruction. Now awakened, his mind bloomed. A question from his youth returned to him, taking over his focus and guiding his choices. Who was really in charge of the world? Where did the highest authority reside? He drove himself harder every day. The pain which had sparked this change became more distant. The looks of judgment and critique lost their sting and eventually went unnoticed. His eyes only left his tomes of knowledge when he slept, or when testing his thoughts with his professors or the few fellow students he respected. The rest, from whom he had once sought attention and validation, faded into the background. 3 years rushed by in this manner. His teachers proudly congratulated him, bestowing upon him honors for his novel and exemplary scholarly works. He did not care. He was still far from his goal. He found most of what modern academia spouted on these topics to be frivolous efforts to assert relevance in a stagnated world. He saw through it. On the other side, he saw an idea emerging, a way to calculate control and authority, a model that could act as a guide through the vastly complex labyrinth of global decision-making. He had some money left over from an inheritance and a family name that opened doors, so he launched himself into completing his research. Following where his model guided him, he found himself interviewing ever higher echelons of society on what it meant to be in charge, to rule. CEOs, barons, mayors, ministers, and then kings, queens, and even the Pope. The model led him to and then through all of them. towards some calculated higher authorities. As he bounced around the world following his inquiries, he took advantage of quiet moments to reflect on the nature and complexity of control, the challenge of defining influence in a multi-dimensional society. He would get excited when he believed himself to have found an authority endpoint, someone who resided unguided over a pyramid of hierarchy, only to feel distraught when he realized invisible strings pulled said authority this way and that. Legal counsel, religion, family, fashion, public opinion. The list of influences alone could fill a book. But with each failure, he refined his model. Soon he began anticipating variables accurately. However, the global network was vast and complex, looping endlessly, one side influencing the other and then back again. No one was truly in control, more like surfers guiding their boards over mindless waves. He found himself returning to his old dorm one day, feeling distraught and lost, not knowing where to go next. He sought out something familiar, hoping to reconnect with the fire that had fueled his drive all those years ago. The dorm had since housed numerous students, yet it still bore some familiar marks he had made during his life there. He walked the streets around the campus, reflecting on how the pain from all those years back was still there, though greatly faded. The sting of loss had softened to a blunt prod, more an old frenemy than the destructive maelstrom it had once been. He was tracing carvings he'd made in an ancient oak tree in a failed romantic gesture when an insight struck him, a new way of seeing his model in relation to the world. Sprinting to his computer, he picked out his thoughts hastily, lest they disappear like a forgotten dream. He spent the next few days updating the model and then ran a test. 100% accurate, it reported. Goosebumps shot through his body. He had done it. He was sure it would work. The solution had involved some insane leaps of logic he could not fully grasp himself. Even though he had made it, it was almost mystical to him, as if spoken to from some deep well of insight. He excitedly unleashed the model on the internet, directing it to access every index available, every country on the planet, every online news outlet, and then he waited as it ran its magic, mapping out global power and influence. And then it was done. As he explored its output, examining how national leaders and wealthy individuals formed intricate, ever-shifting webs, he figured out how to request prioritization so he could categorize and organize the data depending on which definitions he chose. He spent hours watching maps of hills and valleys shift and change as the nature of power and control morphed, and then it appeared. The coordinates to the ultimate power on the planet. No matter how he shifted and changed his definitions, this place remained the highest authority, resided here. But there was no information about it, no name, no history, just coordinates. End of part 1. Part 2. He debated with himself for a while whether to take the coordinates seriously, reviewing the whole model and its data sources. In the end, he gave up. Either these coordinates were correct, or all his conclusions were wrong, and his years of work were wasted. Either way, he had to know. I guess I'm going to Iceland, he said aloud, typing the coordinates into a search. Hekla, he read. In olden days, people believed it to be the gate to hell. That boded well. The location was near the volcano Hekla, in an area far from any town or even road. surrounded by what looked like desert and lakes. He booked tickets for the following week, giving himself a few days to get ready. The flight over was pleasant enough. The stewardess had been particularly welcoming. With her blonde, blue-eyed look, a lot of Icelanders turned out to look like her, a nation of Viking descendants. The University of Iceland's sociology department was his first stop. His old professor had given him the contact for a local academic named Guðfinnur. Although the man turned out to be of no use, the fleece-wearing Icelander just laughed when he heard Mario's story, then explained that no one had lived in that area for centuries. The only people who visited were tourists and wealthy fly fishermen. When Mario insisted on going anyway, even if the devil himself were there to meet him, Guðfinnur gave him the contact for his nephew Gunnar, a mountain guy with a car that could go anywhere. Gunnar turned out to be the very ideal of a modern Viking. Big, bulky, with long blonde hair in braids. They discussed the plan, and Gunnar said that he could be ready the next day. If they set off early, they could reach the coordinates before evening. When Mario asked if it wouldn't be dangerous to drive in the dark, Gunnar laughed and told him that this time of year it never got dark, as opposed to winter, when it was dark most of the day. Probably why we're all manic and insane, he added. The journey turned out to be extremely pleasant. Gunnar had endless amusing stories to share of stupid tourists and his crazy friends getting in and out of trouble. The wild landscape made a perfect backdrop for Mario's thoughts as he wondered what he would find. He was not a superstitious man, but everything indicated that there would be no hidden secret organization with the global elites in its control. Maybe there was something to the stories Gunnar told him, of elves and hidden people who meddled in the lives of men. As preposterous as that was, at least it would be something. The worst scenario would be if there was nothing but sand and rock. He put it out of his mind and enjoyed the ride as it took them further and further away from civilization. "We are here," Gunnar said, waking him from his contemplation. They had arrived at the coordinates. "Is that it?" Gunnar asked, pointing at a field of well-kept grass, growing like an oasis in the harsh surroundings. Mario got out of the car and walked towards the field. As he neared, he saw a small turf-covered house at the far end. It had a low door and 2 windows on either side. As he approached, the door opened and a bent-over old lady came out to greet them. "Hello, velkomnir og gangið í bæinn," she said. Mario didn't understand the words, but her gesture of welcome seemed universal. She led them inside the narrow corridors that felt more like tunnels than hallways. Then she pointed them to a table with elegantly carved, well-worn chairs. They sat down as she went into the kitchen. Gunnar looked just as bewildered as Mario. Everything in the room seemed ancient. A cuckoo clock ticking in the corner, an oxidized mirror, a faded carpet. Yet it was all clean and functional. The old woman returned with a steaming pot and placed it on the table, beside a spread of snacks and bites she had somehow magicked onto it without their noticing. "Svona, þið hljótið að vera svangir. Fáið ykkur bita," she said, pointing to the food. Gunnar answered and dug in, while Mario hesitated. What was going on? Why had his model led him here? Who was this simple-looking woman? "Are you here alone?" he asked, accepting a plate with some kind of sponge cake. When she only looked at him encouragingly, he took a bite. It was the best cake he had ever tasted, and he was hungry. So he set to gulping down the various items from the buffet. In between bites, Gunnar translated. The woman said she lived there alone with her sheep, that she'd been there as long as she could remember and could recall many generations of her flock. "Can you ask if she gets many visitors?" Gunnar asked, then translated her answer. "Sometimes people wandered over from the lakes. She enjoyed the company, so as long as they were kind to the sheep." Mario wanted to pull on this thread. This woman, according to the model, was the most influential person in the world. He looked up to her. She returned his gaze with a soft, friendly smile. He saw nothing in her eyes except the warmth of a sweet, simple old lady, no cunning mastermind capable of orchestrating what exactly. All his models had made sense up to now, the way they networked influence and power across various categories, but this made no sense. Gunnar, now finished happily stuffing himself, was conversing with the old woman. After a few exchanges, he turned to Mario. "She asked why you're here. I told her you were looking for something. Care to explain?" Mario looked between Gunnar and the old woman, who again gazed at him with patient expectation. Part of him didn't see the point in explaining what was clearly turning out to be a monumental failure. He felt embarrassed. More than that, he felt distraught. All that time wasted. But worse, he truly believed. He thought he was being guided, that finding the truth would somehow help him move forward. It had all made sense in his head. Now his faith was in ruins. The old woman commented something, and Mario already knew she was encouraging him to speak before Gunnar translated. So he figured, why not? And he launched into the whole story. End of part 2.
Very.
Part 3. The old lady invited Mario to stay and help out at the farm. The invitation came as a surprise. He looked to Gunnar to see if this was normal. Gunnar laughed. "Brother, nothing about you seems normal. No one lives like this old lady anymore. You stay at your own peril." As the tall Viking packed the tent back into his car, he added, "Maybe she's looking for a new husband. There are tales of the hidden people stealing off helpless men like us and having their way with them." Mario glanced at the old woman and thought this an unlikely hypothesis. He thought about the long journey that had brought him here, and how nothing was waiting for him after this except the admission of failure. He decided to stay. A small hope lingered that he might yet figure out why his model had led him here. Gunnar left around noon after a warm goodbye. Mario watched the car disappear into the landscape. The only noise was the bleating of sheep. The calm of the grassy field, surrounded by a desert, reminded him of the precariousness of life. And the old woman surviving here alone, that alone was worth staying to understand. Inside the turf-covered cottage, she greeted him and showed him to a room she had made up for him. A hard bed with plenty of blankets and a desk by a window overlooking the field and the untouched highland wilderness. He looked forward to drawing the mountain ranges again, something he hadn't done since boyhood. People pay good money for this kind of isolation, he thought, like a silent Vipassana retreat. Well, almost silent. The old woman spoke to him often. She didn't seem to care that he didn't understand her language. Her sweet, expressive voice and animated body language made her meaning generally clear, even if details were missed. The next few days went by quickly. Mario found his rhythm, helping tend the land, going on long walks exploring. He began sketching and keeping a journal. The old woman fascinated him more each day. How had she lived here alone for so long? Many people he knew back home would last only a few days under these conditions. Though careful conversation and much gesturing, he gathered that she'd been alone here for decades, with only occasional visitors. Weeks passed, a month, Gunnar returned to check on him. Mario told him he wanted to stay longer. He had yet to figure out the puzzle, and truth be told, he was enjoying it. The simplicity of life in this isolated place was healing him in ways he could feel but not yet understand. After Gunnar left again, Mario settled deeper into the rhythm of farm life. He observed the old woman closely, half hoping to catch her performing some mystical act that would reveal a break in the workings of the world, something that would vindicate his model. But she simply tended her sheep and prepared for winter. One evening, nearly a month later, after a long day of working the fields, he sat in his room reflecting. His mind had become clear. The trauma of the past fell silent. Even the failure of his model no longer stung. He now saw it as an important step of his self-growth. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock. The old woman entered, carrying a hand-carved wooden box. She placed it on the table by the window, then produced an ancient Polaroid camera and motioned for him to pose. He complied without questioning. She snapped the picture, waited for it to develop, and spoke words he didn't understand. The meaning was clear. She was content. She placed the photo on the wooden box and left him alone. He picked up the picture. The man in it was not the same man who had arrived 2 months ago. His transformation was subtle but complete. Then he turned his attention to the box. It was made of light-colored wood carved with Viking patterns and runes. Inside were Polaroid photos, dozens. He picked up a few. A cold rush shot through his body. These were photos of people he recognized, people he had interviewed, global leaders, the most influential figures on the world. He sorted through them twice. They were real. When he emerged from the room, the old woman sat in her chair, finishing a woolen sweater. He wanted to ask her about the box, so many questions, but her calm gaze seemed to silence him. She understood his confusion. No answers were coming. She handed him the finished sweater and gestured for him to try it on. It fit perfectly. Her eyes shone with love and acceptance. In them, he saw that he had been accepted into something beyond his comprehension. Tears welled up and rolled down his cheeks onto the wool made from the sheep that had been her life. The next day, Gunnar arrived. Perfect timing. Mario thought he could translate. But the words would not come. The finality of the previous night, the woman's demeanor, it tied his tongue. The box felt sacred now. Knowing his picture had joined that collection gave him a sense of meaning beyond anything he could articulate. The goodbye was simple and unceremonious, and somehow that made it perfect. Once back in the world, Mario applied his model in ways that improved governance on many levels. He rose to prominence, became influential in his own right. He never returned to the old woman. He presumed she had passed not long after. He did, however, meet others from the box. At first, he wanted to ask them all about it. But when their eyes met, he saw all he needed, a deep, wordless resonance. The old woman's influence shone in their smiles, the same smile he now carried in the mirror. He would thank her until the end of his days, and he always thought of her sheep when he wore the sweater, her flock, her reason for being. He made sure the great big world would be kind to the old woman's sheep. The end.